The secret history no one thinks will repeat until it does. Your bank app showed $0, your currency was collapsing, and your savings were suddenly worthless. Would you know what to do? Most people wouldn't. And that's exactly why history keeps repeating. Welcome to Finsar, the place where money isn't just numbers. It's history, power, and survival. Every empire insists its money is safe. Every government swears its system will last forever. And every single time, without exception, history humiliates them. Rome said the same thing. France said the same thing. Lebanon said the same thing just a few years ago. The pattern isn't rare. Collapse is the rule, not the accident. That's why the most dangerous financial mistake isn't bad spending. It's believing the system is permanent. We stare at our bank balance like it's carved in stone, but money isn't stone. Money is trust, and trust can evaporate faster than a trending meme. Look at the Byzantine Empire. For centuries, their gold coin, the solidus, was the medieval world's global reserve currency. Merchants in 3 continents accepted it without question. It was the dollar of its time. But here's the twist nobody expects. Even after watching Rome destroy its own currency by adding cheaper metals, the Byzantines repeated the same mistake in gold. They thinned it, shaved it, mixed it. Quietly at first, hoping no one would notice, but people always notice eventually. Trust cracks, trade slows, and suddenly the coin that held an empire together becomes a political fiction. Meanwhile, the people who doubted early, the merchants hoarding physical gold, the landowners with assets outside imperial control, walked away with their wealth intact. Everyone else got wiped out. And that right there is lesson 1 of every collapse in history. Governments cannot resist the temptation to dilute their money. And when they finally give in, value runs toward things they cannot print, fake, or legislate into existence. But not every collapse comes from greedy rulers. Some are triggered by shocks so massive they rewrite society overnight. In the next part, you'll see how one disaster killed half a continent and created the biggest unexpected wealth transfer in medieval history. When disaster strikes, wealth doesn't disappear. It moves. The most terrifying collapses in history aren't always caused by kings printing money or emperors diluting currencies. Sometimes they happen because the world gets hit with something so violent, so unexpected, that society shatters overnight. And the clearest example of that is one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, nearly half of Europe died. Half. Entire cities went silent, villages emptied, markets collapsed, trade routes stopped. But here, Okobotis, the uncomfortable truth history hides beneath all the tragedy. Wealth didn't vanish, it transferred. When half the population disappears, something strange happens. Land becomes cheap, food becomes cheap, labor becomes priceless. Suddenly, the people who survived had bargaining power no peasant had ever imagined. Wages rose. Landlords begged workers to return. Families with even a little silver, grain, livestock, or tools found themselves in the strongest position of their lives. Now, pause. Doesn't that feel familiar? Because we lived through a modern version of this. During COVID, supply chains cracked, factories shut down, shops collapsed, governments printed trillions to keep the machine from stalling. And just like the Black Death, the impact wasn't equal. Those with liquidity, people holding cash, assets, stocks, scooped up property and shares while prices dipped. Meanwhile, millions living paycheck to paycheck fell behind as inflation surged and rents exploded. History didn't repeat, it rhymed. Pandemics have always been wealth shifters. The plague gave survivors access to abandoned property, fertile land, and cheap labor. COVID rewarded those who already had access to capital. It is a brutal but necessary truth. Crises punish the unprepared and elevate those who have even a small cushion. People think wealth grows during peaceful times, but history shows something different. Some of the greatest fortunes were built during chaos by those who simply had the breathing room to act while others were drowning. And pandemics are just one type of shock. The next collapse showed that even the strongest financial institutions, the ones people swear are too big to fail, can fall like dominoes. In the next part, you'll see how the most powerful banks in Renaissance Europe collapsed overnight, and why believing big means safe is one of history's deadliest money traps. When too big to fail becomes the biggest lie in finance. If pandemics show us how fast a shock can flip an entire economy, the next collapse shows us something just as frightening. Institutions that look unbreakable can fall faster than anyone believes. Travel back to 14th century Florence, the financial capital of Europe. This was the Wall Street of its age. Florence wasn't just rich, it was powerful. Bankers here financed kings, armies, international trade, even wars. 2 names dominated the entire system, the Bardi and the Peruzzi. Megabanks so influential that ordinary citizens believed they could never fall. Sounds familiar, right? But the danger with institutions that look invincible is simple. Everyone trusts them, until the very moment they can't. In the 1340s, these banks made a catastrophic mistake. They lent enormous sums to Edward III of England, who was fighting ruinously expensive wars against France. The loans were huge, risky, and based entirely on reputation rather than reality. Eventually, Edward did what debtors throughout history do when pressure hits. He defaulted. And when the king stopped paying, the Bardi and Peruzzi collapsed almost instantly. Depositors were wiped out. Businesses fell with them. Trade froze. Florence, a city bursting with wealth, plunged into crisis. The ordinary citizen learned a brutal truth. Too big to fail is a lie as old as banking itself. It happened in Florence in 1345. It happened with Lehman Brothers in 2008. And it happened again in Lebanon when banks froze accounts in 2019. The story never changes. Only the technology does. Institutions exist to profit, not to protect you. Their promises are solid, right up until the moment they aren't. And once confidence breaks, collapse spreads like fire. That's why the savers who trusted the system disappeared, while the people who held assets, land, gold, grain, connections, trade networks, survived the destruction. This is the uncomfortable truth. The system protects you only when it's convenient. In a crisis, you're on your own. But if you think collapse only comes from kings and bankers, wait until you see what happens when an entire nation prints its own money into oblivion. In the next part, you'll witness one of the fastest currency deaths in American history, and the lesson every modern saver needs to hear. When a country destroys its own money, the American currency collapse you never learned about. Most people think currency collapse is something that happens elsewhere, in unstable nations, in far-off places, under corrupt leaders. But America itself has lived through one of the fastest, ugliest currency implosions in modern history, and almost no one today even knows it happened. During the Civil War, both the Union, North, and the Confederacy, South, discovered a brutal truth. War on that scale is impossible to fund without printing money. So they printed, and printed, and printed. In the North, the government issued greenbacks, paper money backed by nothing but national confidence. At first they worked. People believed in the Union. They believed in victory. But printing has no brakes, and every new note made the last one worth a little less. Inflation crept in. Prices rose. Trust wavered. But the South suffered something far more catastrophic. Desperate for resources, the Confederacy printed graybacks in mind-blowing quantities. And because they had fewer resources, less industry, and no solid backing, the collapse hit them like a tidal wave. By the war's end, prices had risen thousands of %. Salaries were worthless before soldiers even reached home. Families carried bags of money to buy a simple loaf of bread. The currency didn't weaken, it died. When Confederate money burned, what survived wasn't patriotism or paper promises. It was hard assets, land, food, livestock, gold, tools, resources, anything real, anything physical, anything the government couldn't print into oblivion. And ordinary Southerners learned the lesson too late. A lifetime of savings evaporated in months, while opportunists with tangible goods bought land, farms, and businesses for pennies. This is the part of American financial history nobody teaches, but everyone needs. Your own country can destroy its currency, even accidentally. And when it happens, the only wealth that survives is the kind the system can't dilute. But if the Civil War was one kind of disaster, the French Revolution was another. A collapse so violent it turned paper money into ash and bread into a luxury. In the next part, you'll see how political chaos can erase savings faster than any battlefield. When revolution devours money faster than kings ever could. If the Civil War showed how quickly a nation can destroy its own currency, the French Revolution showed something even more terrifying. Political chaos can erase money faster than any war, any king, or any enemy. 1790s France wasn't just unstable. It was a country ripping itself apart. The monarchy had collapsed, the streets were boiling with anger, and the new revolutionary government desperately needed a way to fund everything. The army, the reforms, the chaos. So they created a brand new paper currency, the assignat, supposedly backed by confiscated church land. It sounded safe, logical, even patriotic. But the moment any government discovers it can print value, it will. And France printed, then printed more, then printed so many assignats that the paper itself became worth more than the promise printed on it. Trust collapsed. Prices spiraled. Bread, the basic fuel of France, became so expensive that riots erupted in Paris. Farmers refused to sell food for worthless paper. Workers couldn't survive on wages that lost value every week. The assignat didn't just decline. It became a joke, literal trash, swept off streets, burned for heat, mocked in pamphlets. By the end, it was worth almost nothing. And while the government kept shouting, "It's backed by land," no one believed them. Because once trust breaks, money dies, regardless of what it's backed by. Who survived? Not the patriots who held the government's new currency, but the ones who held silver and gold, grain, livestock, property, goods, people actually needed, anything real and physical. Once again, history whispered the same warning. When trust collapses, savings don't shrink, they vanish. The French Revolution didn't just change politics. It rewrote who held wealth and who had none. And the pattern didn't end in Europe. Because centuries later, Asia would face a collapse of its own, not because of revolution, but because of something far more modern: debt and currency dependency. In the next part, you'll see how a single currency attack triggered a chain reaction across Southeast Asia, wiping out savings, destroying economies, and teaching the world a lesson about debt that still applies today. When debt turns into a trap and a region collapses overnight. If the French Revolution showed how political chaos can vaporize a currency, the Asian financial crisis showed something far more modern and far more dangerous. A nation doesn't need war or revolution to collapse. It only needs debt in the wrong currency. The year was 1997. Thailand looked unstoppable. Foreign investors were pouring in. Skyscrapers were rising. The Thai baht was confidently pegged to the US dollar, and everyone believed the peg would hold forever. But belief is not protection. And when the cracks appeared, they appeared instantly. Speculators attacked the baht. Thailand tried to defend it, but you cannot defend a currency with money you don't have. And Thailand didn't have enough dollars to protect itself. When the peg finally broke, the baht collapsed, and something terrifying happened. All the debts Thailand had borrowed in dollars suddenly exploded in cost. Overnight. A loan that was manageable on Monday became unpayable on Tuesday, and Thailand wasn't alone. Like dominoes falling in slow motion, the collapse spread across Southeast Asia. Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea. Their currencies crashed, their debts doubled or tripled. Markets plunged, businesses went bankrupt. Entire middle classes saw decades of savings vanish in months. People who had worked their whole lives woke up to find their money worth half, then a quarter, then almost nothing. And yet, the global institutions that helped trigger the crisis, hedge funds, foreign banks, investors, walked away with cheap fire sale assets. Asian families lost homes, Wall Street firms bought skyscrapers. This was not an accident. It was a reminder of a lesson history keeps repeating. Debt in someone else's currency is a noose. And when the storm hits, the debtor, not the creditor, is the one who drowns. Ordinary citizens paid the price, while anyone holding US dollars or assets abroad survived far better. And this wasn't ancient history. It wasn't medieval. This was a modern collapse, happening while the world watched. But as brutal as this crisis was, the next case study is even more personal. A collapse so recent, so shocking, that millions are still living in the ruins of it today. In the final part, you'll see what happens when modern banks simply lock their doors, and people realize too late that the money they own is really just a promise that can be broken in an instant. When the banks lock the doors and your money stops belonging to you. If the Asian financial crisis proved how deadly foreign debt can be, Lebanon proved something even darker, something most people still refuse to believe. Your money in the bank is not fully yours. It's a loan you've given them, and they can decide not to return it. Between 2019 and 2021, Lebanon experienced one of the fastest financial implosions in modern history. It didn't start with war. It didn't start with a pandemic. It started when the people who controlled the money simply ran out of truth to stand on. Overnight, banks froze accounts. Citizens woke up to find withdrawals limited, transfers blocked, their deposits trapped, and their currency collapsing like wet paper. The Lebanese pound lost over 90% of its value. A lifetime of savings became the price of a grocery run. Retirees, teachers, engineers, entire middle-class families were wiped out without a single bomb being dropped. People lined up outside banks begging for access to their own money. Some stormed the buildings. Some held staff hostage just to withdraw enough for medical bills. This wasn't a movie scene. It was real life. And the bitter truth came out. Bank deposits aren't guaranteed. They're assumptions. The people who survived best weren't the optimists. They were the doubters. The ones who had assets abroad, gold, property, cash stored outside the banking system, or diversified wealth that didn't depend on one institution's honesty. Those who trusted the system completely were trapped inside it. And the terrifying part? This isn't a Lebanese problem. In 2008, Americans watched banks collapse while their homes were repossessed. In 2020, trillions were printed to prevent another meltdown, inflating asset prices while wages stagnated. In 2023, regional U.S. banks failed almost overnight when depositors lost confidence. The illusion of safety holds right up until it doesn't. So what actually protects you? History's answer is brutally consistent. Brutally. In Byzantium, protection was gold. After the Black Death, it was liquidity. In Florence, it was not trusting big banks. In the Confederacy, it was hard goods. In France, it was food and property. In Asia, it was avoiding foreign debt. In Lebanon, it was diversifying before the crash. Survivors weren't lucky, they were prepared. They held what governments couldn't print, what banks couldn't freeze, what crises couldn't erase. And there's one universal truth. And here is the truth you can ignore. Collapses done to destroy everyone. They expose the difference between those who trusted the system and those who prepared for the moment it breaks. The only question left is this: when the next shock hits, will you freeze like the many or move like the few? Thanks for watching Finsar. Remember, your mindset is your greatest asset. Don't forget to explore more videos to master your money. If you want the blueprint the top 1% use to stay unshakable, even when everything around them collapses, then your next step is simple. Watch my video, How to Manage Your Money Like 1%. Your future wealth will thank you later.